Hey there everyone, Mazrock here, and this week in Eberron lore, we're going to be talking about the Last War and its impact on the many nations of Khorvaire. Alright, so in 894 in Khorvaire, the last King Galifar passed away. His sons and daughters decided to argue for the throne. The rightful, by line of succession, was the Queen of Syria, and her brothers and sisters did not agree. Each one, of course, thought that they should be the rightful king and or queen. So the nations, of Karnath, Thrain, Siri, Brelan, and Undare went to war. That war lasted 100 years, finally ending in 994. During that 100-year war, House Decaneth, the dragon-marked house, created the Warforged and sold them off to whoever would buy them. Many new nations decided to separate or take advantage of war-torn areas and carve out their own piece of land within Khorvaire. The goblins and hobgoblins, through super intelligent maneuvering, got their kingdom of Dargoon back. Yes, back. That is something that we will talk about when we're covering that nation. So Brelan lost that, and as well, the nation of Droam, of monstrous races led by 3 hags, spurred up from the west of Brelan. The Eldine Reaches had a surge of farmers from Undare. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that one correctly. That decided to separate from Undare. Thrain expanded their borders and took land from Undare as well. Undare is a rather large country to begin with. We'll go through that one to Brelan and Undare being the biggest. Thrain embraced the Silver Flame, the religion of the Silver Flame, and Karnath embraced necromancy. The elves of Valinar took by force their land that is to the east of Siri. The Talenta Plains were kind of always just the Talenta Plains, and yeah. So a lot of things occurred during the last war, and what's happening now. So most settings, so if you read Eberron, Rising of the Last War, most campaigns take place in 998. That's 4 years after the last war ended, and what ended the last war was the Day of Mourning. What the Day of Mourning is, nobody knows exactly, and that is a large point of contention that also ended the war. A magical fog spurred within Siri. There's different reports of that day on where it originated from. Some people believe it originated from House Decaneth's compound that were creating Warforged. Some people believed it originated from Metrol. There were many eyewitnesses that claimed where they saw the fog originate from as they did escape it. It wasn't a massively swift-moving fog that encompassed everything, but it was fast enough to encompass the entire country, but not without its border edges being able to run away to survive. So those stories kind of all mix in the loom, but what actually caused it is unknown. There are theories that the massive amount of magic being used during the war was a major cause. As well as many other theories as well, but nobody wants that to happen again, because that fog 4 years later is still there. And Siri is now a completely desolate wasteland. Some have claimed to have gone in, that the bodies that have died in there have not decomposed, and they're the exact state that they were when they died. There are reports of living spells and lots of other things in Siri, but we're going to cover that more deeply when we go into the mourning and what was Siri. The fact that occurred was enough to put the fear of daylight in every other nation to a point to stop the war, because this cannot happen again before Khorvaire just gets swallowed whole. So the Treaty of the Thronehold was announced 2 years after the Day of Mourning. which ratified many new nations like Dargoon, the Eldeen Reaches, Valinar, they separated from the kingdoms that were and became their own nations with their own governments. But many points of contention still live on. I mean, it's only 4 years after the last war, so the citizens of Undair don't like the fact that the Eldeen Reaches took a lot of their farmers and a lot of their land. They don't like the fact that Thrain went northward and took some of their land, and the Thronehold, which was a beautiful city within Undair at the time. Breland does not like the fact now that they have, to the west of them, they have the monstrous nation of Drome, which the treaty did not ratify as an actual nation. The problem is the landmass there is rather voluminous, and the warlords of Drome are now banded together by 3 sister hags that have taken control over the nation and are doing a very, very good job of it at keeping Breland away. Now, war between Breland and Drome have not begun again, but skirmishes along the border are very, very common. So that's something to keep in mind, because nobody really wants a full-blown war, but at the same time, the issues that caused the war were never resolved. So the entire state of Khorvaire is in a Cold War-like state. But instead of just between being 2 countries, it's between many different nations. So there are prejudices that have arisen, questions about races as well. So like the Warforged, they were created for the war. Well, what happens to them now that, the war's done? They're not needed. Well, they were all given their own freedom and the right to do what they want, but of course there are many groups of races in Sharn, the capital of Breland. You can often find anti-Warforged protests as saying that they don't like them, they don't want them, get them away. But then there's many that have welcomed them with open arms, but they are free to do as they will, as any other race is in Eberron, in the continent of Khorvaire. Now we have all of these nations that are newly ratified, old nations scarred from war. There is a massive power imbalance between everyone, and everyone is afraid of the morning and it reoccurring. So we have Cold War state. We have cities that have been desecrated by war, hit hard, overtaken by one nation, then taken by another, and then taken back by the original, and then just ping-pong back and forth. So the citizens are scarred from war for the most part. So if you're running a campaign, perhaps have some of your characters explain what happened in the war, which nation were they on, who did they support, because that can all come into play through very, very nice role play. Perhaps you have someone that supported Breland, Ciri, or things like that. And now we bring up Ciri. So there are still Sirens. Sirens? That are alive. There were many that were off on missions, fighting on front lines in Thrain, Breland, and Karnath that weren't in Ciri for the day of mourning. And as well, there are some that did get away. Those are now being led by the new prince, who has taken upon himself to kind of make a refugee camp, which Breland has been kind enough to let him make within their borders. So that is now called New Ciri. So that is another very, very good explanation. Not good explanation, sorry. That is a very good campaign idea, where you might be able to help New Ciri kind of wedge out their own piece of land and maybe have their effect on a new Treaty of the Thronehold that could be revised, amended, or anything like that. So that's a great campaign idea there as well. But that would involve a lot more intrigue and roleplay. It'd be less swashbuckling adventure, but there's always combat that can be added pretty much anywhere. And if your players want to fight something enough, there's always more things to fight about. So that is the that's the wide version of the last war, and there are many inventions that were created by and magics that were created by the different nations. But we're going to go over those case by case, nation by nation, because how these nations are now affected and how they are is directly related to the last 100 years of war that they've had and how they feel about the morning. So as we go along in this series and we cover the different nations, we'll cover kind of what they did in the last war, how they became a nation, how they survived the war, and go into that a little bit deeper. But before we cover any of the nations, we really, really needed to cover the last war and what it was and how deeply it impacted the entire continent. I think basically the only nations that are kind of left untouched were the Demon Waste, which nobody really wanted to go there anyway. The Shadow Marshes, which again sounds like a very unpleasant time to have a war in, and it is on, you know, the eastern border. Khorvaire and the Lazar principalities as well were slightly left to their own devices, and the Elves of Eberron as well, because they have their own little island, but they supplied materials to the highest bidder. So that covers the last war. Next week we will probably be starting with Breland, because most campaigns start in Sharn, which is something that I want to get away from that habit of. There's nothing wrong with it. Sharn is a wonderful city in Breland that is fantastic for any adventurer to start in, but I've done it a couple of times, and I think starting somewhere else would be a little bit funner. But that's just me. But we'll cover Breland and its kind of main occupants, its cities, its royalties, and we'll go into a deep dive into Breland next week. So follow me on that. I stream on Twitch every Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern. As well, we are streaming Rime of the Frost Maiden at 7 p.m. Eastern on Sundays. So please do come and join us for that. And if you would like to support this channel directly, my Patreon's in the link below. It does go such a long way, and I am trying to put out new goodies for y'all every week. So that way it's downloadables, printables, maps, whatever I can think of, I'm trying to kind of give you guys. I'm trying. So, and if there's anything that you'd like to see on the Patreon as well, if there's something you're missing at your table, please let me know, and I'll find a way to come up with it, and we can have some fun that way too. Aside from that, don't forget to have fun at your next session. And